All right. Well, welcome to Unsilent Church, and we are starting sort of a new set of episodes talking about, how should we describe, I guess, taboos in the life of the church, things that people in the church don't talk about, or when they talk about it, they react, I think, in ways that aren't right, that aren't good. And what we want to do is sort of unearth a lot of these different topics and maybe really help us understand why they're important, and even more so why the church should be engaged, positively engaged in these topics. And we're happy to be able to talk about this one. Chrystal, who's hosted with us a number of different times, is able to talk to this really well. Chrystal, why don't you introduce your partner, Josh Coe, a little bit about
co-laborer,
right?
Exactly.
And well, I should mention a topic. The topic we want to talk about today is mass incarceration. And so maybe just you guys set up a little bit in terms of what you guys do together, and then we'll sort of get rolling from there.
Awesome. Okay. So, again, Chrystal McCowan, and I work on an initiative called Neighbors Table under Surge Network. And this is my colleague, Josh Coe, who came on the team as one of our filmmakers doing a lot of the podcasts. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But we are starting an initiative just to kind of get the faith community involved and engaged in mass incarceration. And so, yeah.
Well, let me ask you then, Josh. Maybe we should just even define what we're talking about here. That's a term people throw around a lot. Like, what do we mean by mass incarceration? And am I right to say that this is sort of an issue, not just within the sort of the world at large, but even within the church and how they think about this issue and how they approach this, how they're reluctant, I should say. Yeah. You told me a story recently about this.
People are reluctant.
Yeah.
No, I mean, there's 11 million people incarcerated worldwide, and 2.3 million at least is incarcerated in the U.S.
How's that compared? Are we high on that?
Drastic. Yeah, we incarcerate more people than China.
Really?
Wait. Say, I don't know what you're saying.
So when you're talking, talk into the mic.
Oh, into it.
Because if you talk out here, they can't hear you.
Oh, okay. Cool.
You just like rotate your head like that.
My bad.
I got to teach your brother mic etiquette right here.
Yeah, teach me. My mics are always like this. So anyway. Yeah, so
more than China.
We incarcerate more people than China.
Okay.
And China has a lot more people than the U.S.
By like a factor of 10.
Yeah.
So,
1 out of 6.
But no, I mean, it's a massive issue. It's something that, like the work Chrystal and I are doing, a lot of it is trying to partnership and collaborate with other organizations. But it's interesting because a lot of the people we meet who are in this field have found a lot of silence within the church in regards to it. It's a lot of parachurch organizations, but that's not a lot of actually the church being present in this stuff.
Is it that the church is sort of scared of the issue? That, I think before we started, I talked about just, I don't think I'm wrong to say this, that if when the typical church meets someone who comes in through the doors and they realize that person has a record, maybe just got out of jail, it's sort of like, what do we do with this? Or maybe go somewhere else.
Yeah. I mean, a criminal record is intimidating to people sometimes, but we don't respond to guiltiness in the same way that God responds to guiltiness. A lot of times, God responds way different to guiltiness than we do.
Amen.
So, yeah.
And so, what ways, I guess, to sort of drive the conversation, in what ways do you typically see, Vermont, you referenced the story that Chrystal you told, and so I think maybe that story would be an interesting one that, again, can still launch the conversation, but then sort of speak about like what happened in that story, and then what should the response be, and what is it that sort of Neighbors Table is trying to do to help cultivate those conversations and equip people to have better conversations, and then even equip the church to sort of better respond to people and get more involved sort of in that work.
Yeah, remind me of the story.
Well, I mean, we don't want to name names here, and so it's just more, you were just mentioning stories of just trying to engage with different churches. And being surprised just how reluctant they were. To even talk about this, or even to sort of, some of it was just sort of a reluctance to partner with other churches, right?
Sure.
And some of it just felt like this was like a distraction. I think that's what you were describing.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned a story just of people with churches even just finding out someone has a record and them, maybe someone impolitely asking them to find another church. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I'll say my experience, because I've worked with Neighbors Table going on 2 years now. And that's like my role is to go to churches, other partnerships. And it has been super surprising to hear the responses of pastors, of people who are on staff, as far as like, why should we care about stuff like this? Like, this is literally their response. And I'm like, and I leave and I'm so disheartened. And I mean, it's really sad just to hear the response of people saying like, why should we care about this?
Yeah.
Why should we get involved? Or reform? What do you mean about reform? Like, I think because of what Josh mentioned, I think there's just such a connection to like people should be punished. I think that's just our stance in America. You see that all over, and it seeps into the church. And so we have this posture of like, no, they need to continue to pay for what they've done. And it's a phobia, like it's a fear that the church has, which we shouldn't have. But yeah, just to see the response of churches and people, that's I'm like, man, what is going on? Like how, yeah, it really, anyway, I'll let you speak to that because we talk about this all the time.
All the time. I mean, to answer what Neighbors Table is trying to do too, we're not trying to recreate a wheel. We're trying to be almost as if like a doorway that the church can pass through to get into all the different avenues of bringing change to the incarceral system. Yeah. So we're not trying to recreate something or compete with what other people are already doing, because there's already a lot of organizations, from larger organizations to grassroots organizations that are doing beautiful things. But the church is distant from those things. A lot of times, you know, it's a few people running these successful movements and missions. It's not a massive movement of people. It's just a few. So we would love for the church to pass through what we offer, like these different trainings. We offer framework, biblically and theologically, how to look at this, come through this lens, and then go get plugged in, get plugged into these areas, because there's a lot of room to serve, and there's a lot of miracles and beautiful things that happen in the midst of it.
So how would you describe like the problem, right? When you think about mass incarceration, just in general, right? And you're trying to explain to a church like, yo, here's the problem, and here's why churches are uniquely equipped to help bring a solution or bring relief to that problem. Like, how would you describe that problem? What's the problem?
The problem is multifaceted. It's multifaceted.
We got a little bit of time, you know.
And it's layers and layers deep. You know what I'm saying?
Just start at the top. We'll just,
Well, let's say policy. Policy as far as like when you think about the history of like our criminal justice system, like where it starts with, you know, from presidents putting like harsher punishment on crime, the war on drugs, the war, like all of these things kind of contribute to this mass like induction of people, mainly Black and brown, you know, people, the poor. And so it starts from like there, these policies to like punish people on a very small issue. It could be even if you strip it down, let's think about it like this. If there's someone who's on drugs, whether they're in poverty, they're going to go to jail. And that policy, there's a policy where if you have, I think it's 6 ounces of just powder, crack, whatever, what is it, cocaine? And then if you have like an ounce or so of crack, like that person is going to go to jail for like, 10 years, or that's the minimum that they're going to get. Wow. Versus someone who
for something nonviolent.
Exactly, nonviolent, right? So you're going to spend a long amount of time of jail, but it's these 2 substances, if like whether it's crushed to a powder or a hot or like a hard rock. So it's a lot of things. The policies, the people that they're targeting. There is a thing called $1 million blocks, which I think it's financial. I mean, let's be honest, like people are getting privately run prisons. Exactly. Privately ran prisons. The first time I learned about it, there was this thing that they call, like I said, $1 million blocks, where they have this map and they target certain communities based off of the reading level that they would get money or they would get millions of dollars if they put these types of people in prison. And so you can see this, you can look it up on the internet. It's $1 million blocks. There's articles about it, but I mean, there's so many other things. I'm just touching on just the beginnings of that, just our policies. But other stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, because the money side of things is like that's an angle you can take it at. You know, state-run prisons with private contracts, private prisons with private contracts, all these different things. That's one side of it. And
so state-run prisons sign private contracts. So the state is getting paid.
So there can be a prison that from what I understand, I could be mistaken to some of these things, but like from what I understand, there's prisons that are run by the Arizona Department of Corrections that will have private contracts with other states to come in and send their prisoners here. And then there's profit that comes within those things.
So states are sending other states money. There's economic benefit.
There's an economic benefit. Yeah.
Absolutely.
To keeping people in prison.
Yeah. But in my opinion, like that's a part of the problem. But the other part of it too is just the structure of how our country engages with or defines justice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What would that be?
Well, so in the eyes of our country, justice is more punitive. Mm-hmm. And the same thing that Chrystal hinted at is like, does your punishment ever end?
Yeah.
You know, a lot of dudes' punishment doesn't end when they come out. You got a felony over your head. It's going to be hard to get an apartment, hard to get a job, hard to get a loan. Yeah. So like all these different things that you're going to have to do in ordinary life, you're not going to be able to do at the same capacity that someone else might be able to do it. But you're expected to go back into society and function normally. Yeah. So the question comes then was that 10-year prison sentence your actual punishment, or does your punishment actually last your lifespan? Or is it done at that 10 years? And the other issue I think with our prison system and the way that we engage crime is that a lot of times, dude, people go into prison and they come out worse than when they went in. And the thing is our prisons aren't structured to be a place of like, hey, you're going to be a returning citizen into our community. So
there's no sort of rebuilding. It's not a rebuilding platform.
It's like let's break down these things that led you here. You have a problem with addiction. You have a problem with anger. You have a problem with violence. Okay, well, let's engage those things rather than let's throw you in a cage and
treat you like an animal.
Treat you like an animal.
Rehab,
and also just leave you guys to yourselves to politic on your own and thrive in those ways, and actually let those things get nourished even more.
Yeah, they get cultivated.
And so like. Man, I mean, that's an issue. You also got 98% of cases that go through the judicial system end with a plea deal.
Yeah,
that's outrageous. So imagine you do a crime. So
nobody's actually going to court and getting due process. It's
because
back office type stuff.
Yeah, say you do a crime, supposedly. Yeah. Say you have priors. Say you don't have priors, but maybe you're innocent. Mm-hmm. But the state is saying, yo, we're looking at giving him 20 years. You know what I'm saying? And then they go, we'll offer you a plea. Yeah. If you plead guilty, you'll do 5. And the guy's going to go, man, I would much rather do 5 than have the opportunity and risk doing 20.
Yeah.
So, like, and the fact that 98% of our cases end that way is pretty wild. That's pretty wild. That's scary.
There's a podcast called Serial, and they sort of investigated the Cleveland justice system, the court system. And you're right, that was eye-opening to me, just how they explain how what often happens is that, they arrest someone and they pile all these charges on, and that's intentional, right? It seems overwhelming, and then they you can go to trial, you can go to court, you can go to trial, and try to fight it. Meanwhile, that person's like, well, to go to trial, I'm going to miss work, all these other things, and so like you're feeling that, and that's assuming you can even make bail, right? And then just like you said, they said, well, okay, we'll cut it down. We'll only give you 2 or 3 of these 10 charges, but you got to plead guilty. People do it, right, rather than fight it, and then now they have a record. That changes everything.
Yeah, and on top of that, there's 500,000 people right now sitting in jail because they can't make bail.
Yeah.
People who have not been proven guilty in the court of law. So that's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So you got people that will sit in jail for 2 years and they get out because their case gets dropped. But they still had to sit in jail for 2 years.
Not working.
Not working. Yeah. Yep. So like that's broken. That's terrible. That brings damage to families. That causes people to go, well, then we don't trust the system, man. Well, then we don't enjoy being encountered by the police. Then we don't, so like all these things, it doesn't create good responses.
So as you guys are Christians.
Absolutely.
And you guys, one of the things you mentioned was biblical frameworks that help us think differently about this.
Yeah.
I mean, I know there's a lot to sort of work through, but like, what are ways in which you would encourage Christians to think about how we think of people who get in trouble?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with just like humanizing. I think that's probably the simplest way to say it. Hear the stories of people. Like if I'm sitting with across from an individual who has just re-entered into society, I bet you there is a trail of some type of brokenness that he's experienced in his life. And that's not to excuse, it's not to dismiss or say like, oh, what he did or this path that he ended up on is excusable. But we don't listen to the stories of people. We just already have it in our mind. We have this preconceived notion that they are just like damaged, they're bad. We don't listen to people. We don't listen to their stories, and we don't empathize and connect on a human level. So I think that's one part of it, is hearing the stories.
Yeah. And I actually believe it's built in, like engaging the prisoner is a part of God's heart.
Yeah.
And then it's also part of his calling to the church. Yeah. So in Psalms 102, it talks about how Yahweh looks down from his throne on high to release the prisoner and to release those who've been condemned to death, so that his praise will be heard all throughout Zion. And so, like, it's interesting that God looks down and he looks at prisoners and condemned to death. To me, that, we might read in, oh, it's a martyr, oh, it's someone falsely incarcerated. No, condemned to death, you're probably done something pretty bad. So God looks down from on high to release you, to answer your prayer, so that you would praise him and that the world would hear it. And then on the, Matthew 25, the other verse is like, Jesus mentions,
when I was in prison, you visited.
Yeah. He mentions a few different scenarios that individuals will be in: naked, hungry, thirsty, stranger, sick, and prison. And what you did to the least of these, you did unto me. But there's an interesting reality within that Mother Teresa really embodied, that I talk about a lot, because to me it's really sacred. She, Mother Teresa cared for people who were dying and destitute. She had a home called the Home for the Sick, Dying, and Destitute in India and in Calcutta. And she began a ministry that like rocked that country and was a blessing to people. And it was not glamorous at all. People said when you walked in that home, it smelled like death, right? But one time there's a reporter that came from England to Mother Teresa to ask her, hey, how do you do this and stuff? And he was blown away. And he's learning from her. He's watching all these people, and he talks about how he watched a guy with gangrene get brought in to this place that she was serving people at. And he asked one of the nuns there, like, hey, how did you just clean that dude's wounds for 3 hours? Because I can't stand the smell. And she goes, well, Mother Teresa told me to think about how somehow I'm touching the wounds of my Jesus when I'm touching the wounds of this man. She goes, so I've been touching the wounds of Jesus for 3 hours. So it's been an honor. And that was Matthew 25 really drove Mother Teresa's mission, because there was a mystery that she believed was embodied in the of worship to God and fellowship with God when we're serving the least of these. It's mysterious.
Yeah.
And I think that's something like that we can miss. It's not like when we're serving and just present with the least of these, there's a mysterious, beautiful, sacred fellowship that's happening with Yahweh in the midst of that. And it's mysterious. Yeah. But you feel it when you do it. You know what I mean? You're like, oh man, I feel like I'm close to Jesus right now. Yeah. Well, because somehow mysteriously you are.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So it seems like some categories you want Christians to think about in this issue. People made an image of God. This idea of serving the least should be guiding the way we think about it, how we approach it. Basic understanding of humility. Seems even just that I'm alluding to something you said earlier, that our interactions with people who sin, if we can put it that way, shouldn't be just punishment, but also opportunity for forgiveness, for change, for positive change. That those are sort of categories that should affect how we even begin to think and approach people. Is that the way?
Yeah, and it all comes from how God treats
Restoration,
us.
yeah. That's
Yeah,
good. Yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
God treats us that way.
Yeah, you're right.
All four of us in this room have sinned.
Yeah.
God doesn't categorize us based upon the sins that we made, apparently, right? And so, like, we don't need to treat people that way.
Yeah.
You know, he wants to restore us. Yeah. The prodigal son comes home. He's like, yo, let's throw a party. I'm going to put a ring on your finger and a robe on your back.
Yeah.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
Now, it seems you want to help the church sort of, Neighbors Table wants to be a front door to then getting more deeply involved and learning about the different issues and the different things that you can do. So describe a little bit about that. Almost imagine you guys almost like the porch, right? You kind of like, here's how to begin to think about and approach this. Even the name Neighbors Table implies that you're getting people around a table and having them interact. Maybe talk a little bit about what someone who's in a church or church leader, what do you want them to experience as they begin to engage with your ministry?
Yeah. Well, I'll say one part, and then I'll kick it off to you to talk about the other on-ramps. I think the initial thing is just becoming aware of the issue. We have this one-day intensive that we're inviting people in that goes into, there's six modules. It starts from, understanding who our neighbor is and understanding stories, like I mentioned before, all the way to like the history of it, to different ways and reimagining how our incarceral system could be, to the last one, which we talk about these 5 movements of change where you can engage the issue, whether it's personal transformation, inside game. I won't go into all of them, but there's different ways that you can actually touch these issues. And so we just want people to come into like proximity as far as what the issue is, and then give them ways that they can engage. And so I don't know if you want to talk about
that's pretty much it.
Well,
yeah, we want to get people engaged in it.
Engaged.
And it doesn't mean that everybody's going to be going into a prison
Yeah.
necessarily and going and praying with people or doing Bible studies or long-term ministry. Sometimes it means, man, I'm going to go advocate on a political level, or I'm going to go with leading these groups with my church, so my church is familiar and proximate to these realities as well.
Pen Pal, and we also there's another organization, and maybe you can talk about it, called Inside Out, where a church can actually sign up and say what services that they can provide, whether it's a food bag coming out or like whatever you as a congregation can do. You can sign up and list those things. And so someone who's 11 months out from being released can sign up and get connected with someone in the area that they'll be released to.
Yeah. So churches can be a hub.
Yep,
they can be a place that's beneficial for someone to go to once they get out. And the cool thing is Fred Nelson, he was a pastor in Chicago, and he was doing prison ministry, and he was like getting all the guys that he was doing ministry with were asking him like, hey, can you help plug us up with resources for when we get out? Because if you go on the streets right now and you talk to a lot of people on the streets, a lot of them get fresh out of prison and they don't know where to start, and they're already off on a bad foot. So he's like, man, well, I don't know where the resources are. He's like, I can't even find them. So he's like, you know what? I'm going to create something that's a hub for all these resources, so prisoners can go to one spot, and get access to it all. Yeah. And so he did it through an app, and now that app is getting on tablets and stuff within prison, or they have a representative going to the prison, and then they get to dialogue with an inmate, and then they can get plugged up with all these resources, and they can actually message any provider on the app. So say a church is on the app, that church can message that prisoner through the app.
That's great.
And everyone on that app is there because they chose to be on that app. So it's really cool because anything from health services to living services to food to legal to anything is on this app, and then people can have access to all this in one spot. And that was started by a pastor.
Oh, that's great.
So
that's great news.
Yeah.
It just sounds to me like, again, you started the conversation sort of surprised in the way that churches often respond and be like, why would we care? And I'm like, have you read your Bible recently? Because it sounds like, it really sounds like, and you hear it, you can't help but be like, oh, this is an invitation to participate.
Yeah.
You're like, hey, if you're reading the same Bible I am, it's just like, when I was in prison, you visited me. Yeah. Like, Yahweh looks down from on high, and the intention and the ambition is to do these things. It's like,
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we have the same ambition?
Right.
Why wouldn't we want to participate as people who carry the name of God? Like,
Yeah.
it's funny in the sense of like, you know, we may not say this, but I think we believe it, that taking God's name is more about cussing than it is like the way we carry it as like a mantle, like clothes.
Yeah.
And when God says like, don't take my name in vain,
Wow.
and churches have that kind of response to
Bro.
why should we care about people in prison, you go, oh, are we carrying God's name in vain in that in that sense now?
Yeah.
Like, are we more guilty of doing it than we think? And that was the thing. That was like the first thing. Like, do not take the Lord's name in vain. Do not carry my name in vain. And so here's this opportunity again for churches to participate. And like a pastor starting something like that sounds hopeful. So it's like maybe that story would speak to more churches. But like, you know, how would you think like churches can get more involved, or where would they go? I know we've got to wrap up here soon. But where's the best place for churches to like find information?
How they,
You know, can they sign up to an email list? Can they go to a website?
Does Neighbors Table have a website or contact?
Yeah, we got a website.
Great.
Neighbors-table.com.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, but I would just encourage you just to come to one of our intensive, just to be a part of it, just to see, you know.
Great. You can find it. You can sign up on the website.
Yeah.
You have
Yeah.
Instagram too, I think. Or
Yeah, we got
We got
Instagram too.
Instagram,
Yeah.
yeah.
But all this work starts off with listening.
Yeah.
All this type of stuff starts off with the humble posture. Anytime you're engaging the least of these people
Yes.
in poor or hurting predicaments, you got to start off with a listening posture. And a lot of times it's tough because people, they go online, they read all these things, they got all the statistics down, but we got to enter into this stuff humbly. And so our hope is that people will trust what we're doing, to be like, hey, just listen to some of this, learn from some of this, and let's go come into it. So it's a process, but yeah.
That's great. Yep.
Well, we do call this the Unsilent Church podcast, and for sure this is one of those topics we should not be silent about. And so thankful for you guys and speaking up, and hopefully many more people will get engaged and get involved again. Neighbors-table.com, right? Yeah, check that out and get involved. Well, like we always say, love God, love people. We're out.